We are thrilled to be talking today about the Promise Zones initiative. We're doing this through the purview of our Learning Communities Resource Center, which, as many of you know, has a learning cluster dedicated to place-based work. And as we hear the terms like place-based or collective impact and backbone organization, many of us think of community action as really being the first place to look as a hub for a lot of these activities. So we're thrilled to be able to talk today about Promise Zones specifically. We have some great folks with us who are going to give us some real insight into the administration's thinking on Promise Zones and how community action agencies and our network can really be engaged in this critically important initiative. You are hearing me either through your speakers or through your phone lines. We are recording today's webinar, just to let you know that as well. In addition, there's so many folks registered for today, which is wonderful, but that does mean we can't unmute you for questions. But we do have our chat window in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Please feel free to enter questions, comments, concerns. We have some staff members behind the scenes keeping an eye on those questions that come in, and we'll be giving them to us as we go through today's presentation. So again, please keep those questions coming in, and we will take them as we progress through the presentation. We have several speakers joining us today. First off, we're going to be joined by Jeannie Chaffin. Jeannie is no stranger to community action. As you know, she is the Director of the Office of Community Services and has been in and around and part of community action for over 20 years. Worked at a local agency, worked at the state of Missouri, worked at NASCASP, and is now at the Office of Community Services. So we're thrilled to have her here, giving really that frame of community action and the liaison to our federal partners and being able to kind of offer that bridge between our local network and, again, some of these federal initiatives. We're also joined by Valerie Piper, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Economic Development at HUD. We're thrilled to have HUD be engaged with us, with our community action agency specifically, to have this dialogue. It really is kind of a unique opportunity for us to talk to the powers that be, as it were, when it comes to Promise Zones. She's responsible for a number of different things at HUD, oversees the Office of Community Renewal, the Rural Housing and Economic Development Office, Grants Management for Economic Development, and Brownfield's Economic Development Initiative. She's worked at the Annie Casey Foundation as a senior fellow in the Center for Family Economic Success. She's also done a lot of work with the City of Chicago's Housing Authority and their plan for transformation. She's been involved with the National Equity Fund and many others' experiences. She said earlier she couldn't keep a job, so it's kind of bouncing up and up and up the ladder, as it were. So to have someone who has that on-the-ground expertise again, who understands the value of a network of nonprofit and public local entities that take federal resources to drive local needs, we're thrilled that Valerie could be with us today. And a webinar like this would not be complete with one of our own, right? So we are thrilled that Mary Horstman, who is the Chief of Staff at the Mayor's Office for Community Economic Empowerment and Opportunity, the local CAP agency in the city of Philadelphia. It is a public CAP, and they are a core element of the Promise Zones initiative in Philadelphia, and we are thrilled, again, to have our national partners, but also, again, one of our members of our network and the city of Philadelphia. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeannie to start us off.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you to you and your team, and we have lots of Community Action Partnership staff here working behind the scenes to help make this possible, and we have some OCS staff here lurking in the background too that have made today possible. We really wanted to have this event today to talk to community action folks about Promise Zones because we're on a timeline here. There's an application process that's going to close in November, and we wanted to have a nice opportunity to visit with all of you out there and make sure that you understand what Promise Zones really is about and have an opportunity to go to folks in your community and talk to them about this effort and see if you can help stimulate an application or work with folks who may already be pursuing a Promise Zones application. Before I get too deep into this today, I wanted to just take a minute to reflect on a happening from over the weekend. So many of you on the phone today, I think there were over 200 different community action folks registered, will know the name Charles Braithwaite. Charles Braithwaite was a leader in community action, a state leader, a national leader, many people say a pioneer. He was the executive director of West Central Community Action Agency, which is in Appleton City. The Community Action Agency there takes up several city blocks. It's almost the biggest thing in Appleton City. And Charles helped create that agency along with many good colleagues there in Missouri. He was a leader in the National Community Action Foundation. Some of you will know the story about Community Action suing President Nixon for not releasing money to community action agencies that had been appropriated. It was Charles Braithwaite and West Central Community Action Agency that were listed on that lawsuit. And so Charles was an individual who helped make this movement possible. I would venture to say if it wasn't for him and several other pioneers, we wouldn't be here today talking about the potential in community work that we're going to talk about. And he passed away over the weekend. And so I want to really recognize him today. It's an important connection to talk about Charles Braithwaite and the possibility of building up communities, because he really believed that that's what community action was about. And he fought long and hard to make sure that community action agencies were strong. So take a minute today and say thank you in your mind for Charles Braithwaite, and if you can, cast around and see if you know anybody in your agency who might have known him and can tell you some stories, because he was a really great individual. Okay, so I'm here with some great people too today. Here with Denise and Valerie, and this is an important conversation to have. This administration has really committed to helping address areas of concentrated poverty, whether it be through the promise zones, through choice, through burn criminal justice. Many of the departments here in this administration, whether it be HUD, Department of Education, Department of Justice, are working very hard to help communities come together, lots of different partners, and address the very wicked problem of concentrated poverty. And of course, we here in Community Action know that that's the core of our mission. It's what we've been about since 1964, is bringing people together and trying to get a better focusing of federal, state, and local resources to address poverty. So what we've been committed to here in the Office of Community Services is working with Valerie and her colleagues and our colleagues across other parts of the administration to make sure that folks understand what community action agencies can do, what Community Services Block Grant can do, and then working with all of you to make sure you know what's possible and how you might be able to use CSBG to support these efforts. We all know that none of these problems get addressed by individual programs or even individual agencies, that really what you have to do is have local people focused and very intentional about addressing an issue and working together. That doesn't mean that you might be maybe working in a broader context. Maybe you're working across a whole city or multiple counties, but really getting focused and working with partners in a specific area can achieve a lot, and you can also learn a lot. I think one of the things that we're seeing with Promise Zones is the ability to learn what really works and replicate that in other places. So I think that's really exciting. So I wanted to, just for a minute, mention some of the things that I think really make it important for community action agencies to step up and potentially lead a Promise Zones effort in their community, or work with the city and other important partners in a community. And those are really the kinds of things that make community action unique and make our best agencies, and they are understanding your local community. Community action is required to do a needs assessment on a regular basis and to look at a lot of different data, a lot of different causes of poverty, and you know, bringing that expertise and that information to the table with others, I think, is really important. We have a long history of involving residents, and so oftentimes in our community needs assessments, we'll do town halls, we'll do surveys, of low-income neighborhoods or low-income individuals. And that's really important information that needs to be brought to any kind of promise zones conversation in communities. And then finally, and probably the most important area to mention, is that community action agencies are often very comprehensive and coordinating an existing array of services. So we may have Head Start at the Community Action Agency. There may be other CDBG programs that are being operated by the Community Action Agency, workforce investment, a whole array of services that are really important to addressing the issues of concentrated poverty. So when a community action agency is operating in a very coordinated fashion and has those kinds of resources, it's really important that they bring those to a promise zones conversation, because those kinds of things, early education, workforce, job training, those are the kinds of things that are going to need to be included in a promise zones effort. And so if a community action agency is operating kind of separately and not bringing those things to a promise zones effort, that's not helpful to that neighborhood. And we know that if you're really going to make a difference, you've got to have these kinds of things present. So I, for one, believe that it's really important that community action play a role, and that we really have a responsibility to make sure that we're at the table and that we're helping and using our expertise. So if you have a responsibility, we want to help you think through how you might pursue that. And so we've asked Valerie here today, and she's been kind enough. This is one busy lady. She's moving a lot of mountains, to come and just give us an overview of how Promise Zones is really envisioned, what's the theory behind it. It is a little bit of a different animal, and so it's good to sort of explain it to folks. And then, you know, as Denise said, just thrilled that we have a community action agency. The City of Philadelphia is the designated CAA, who is also the Promise Zones lead. And so hearing directly, as Denise said, from one of our own is really valuable. So, Valerie, I'm going to hand you the baton.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this invitation. And I'm going to, I think, focus my remarks on the selection process that's currently underway, because there really is nobody better than a working Promise Zone lead organization and community action agency to talk about the day-to-day connections that they're making. But certainly we'll all be available for questions at the end, I think, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So thank you very much for very kind introductions. Very flattering to me. I don't know that I deserve all that, but
all true.
Oh dear. But Jeannie and I are here representing a partnership of federal agencies that now includes 10 other federal agencies that are participating in the Promise Zone effort in one way or another. The ways in which they are participating is in looking at their programs and their technical assistance efforts and the regulatory efforts and other things to see what relates most to the activity of revitalizing high concentrated poverty communities, whether they're urban, rural, or tribal. And so some of those are the same programs, overarching programs in different federal departments. Others are very different, programs that focus on urban, rural, and tribal situations. But there's a growing list of programs and, federal activities that are involved in the Promise Zone initiative. And I'll just recommend to folks, and I'll repeat this website several times, but that folks should take a look at www.hud.gov/Promise Zones. And that one webpage has links to a number of really helpful things, including information on the programs that in the FY 2014 year are contributing preference points or other kinds of preferential access to Promise Zones. However, all of those programs are not just exclusive to Promise Zones. They also are available to any other community. So one of the things that we're finding is that people are kind of getting in there and saying, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that, the Department of Treasury did that, and maybe I should look into that further, right? So folks should really spend some time with that website. And you know, the sort of overarching purpose of the Promise Zone initiative, we had some very encouraging news recently coming out of the recession on consecutive periods of job growth and reductions in child poverty rates and things like that, but we know it's still not getting to everywhere across the country, and that sort of hope and economic expansion and opportunity is not reaching all the people that it needs to. So Promise Zones is one of the initiatives that we're undertaking as an administration to try to reach further and help folks that are already working in those communities to accelerate their efforts. In many ways, we're joining the movement that community action has been part of for decades, and in many cases has led for decades. And the way that we're doing that is to sort of set up a structure within the federal system that makes it easier for communities that really have their act together in terms of having really strong targeted strategies that are working in high concentrated poverty areas with a real commitment to sort of tracking outcomes and improving their work consistently based on the results of the data that they're getting back, right? And sort of using that for that continuous improvement, where we see that strong strategy, really strong connection between what the dynamics are in that place. As we all know, that can be real different depending on where you're working and what the what the organizations are like, what the culture is like, what external market forces may be at play, geographic elements, does it or does it not in our world have distressed housing in it, right? That's existing, or is there more of a need for affordability? And things can be very, very different. And we know that we can't anticipate what the nuances are going to be in your communities. Local leadership and organizations like community action organizations are the ones that are best positioned to do that. So what we're looking for are strategies that are well-targeted and comprehensive in their work and aspiration, really respond to the sort of different dimensions of need that are seen, where there is capacity behind each of the roles that are identified in the strategy that need to be played by local organizations, so that we can see that folks are, whatever their role is, they're prepared to carry it out and they've got some track record in doing that. And that there's a good, you used the word backbone organization earlier, that there's a good central organizational vehicle that will keep all of that coordinated and moving over at least a 10-year period, since that often is what it takes. And that, again, that commitment to data is there so that we all can tell what's happening and, what's going on. So where we see that strength of local leadership and structure coming together, we want to make the federal government and the federal system work better to accelerate that progress that is, already taking place. If you've gotten that far, you're probably making a lot of progress, but we feel like, our resources at the federal level could probably be easier to get to and more efficient. And so what we are doing is establishing preference points in competitive federal programs that are particularly useful in high concentrated poverty situations. And we are putting in place a staffing structure at HUD and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and also at all of the other participating agencies. We have noticed certain familiarity with Jeannie and her programs and her staff, because we're working together all the time on this stuff, and trying to figure out how we can really institutionalize that level of coordination here. Really not doing anything more than folks are already doing on the ground, but doing it at the federal level, where sometimes it seems more distant, and creating that level of communication and collaboration that can make us more responsive to you. And that's really what we're trying to do here. So we are putting in place, at HUD and USDA, are putting in place field-based staff who will work directly with the Promise Zone communities that are designated through our selection processes. And then there's a group of people at the headquarters level that do kind of traffic direction and facilitated handoffs and referrals and research and, whatever it takes to help fill a gap that is identified. So if we have sort of a federal and a local partner working together at the community level, really understanding the context that you're working in. So, you know, here we really needed to work this way, and this program doesn't seem to be quite a fit, but what else is there? You know, or we need to figure out whether we need a waiver here, or what, you know, what is it that would move the ball. They have somebody, you know, a group of folks that are working together at the headquarters level to kind of, you know, provide the right information, figure out what the best program fit is. So we're putting all that in place. As I mentioned, HUD and USDA are leading the kind of day-to-day organizing, but the most affected offices in 12 federal agencies are participating and you know, really working with us to figure out how they can provide the best fits for Promise Zone communities. And all of us are thinking hard about how we make whatever it is that we learn from you more available to communities across the country. President Obama has committed that we will name 20 Promise Zones by the end of 2016. That is a drop in the bucket, and we know it, but it is a good target and a good number of situations to be working with to learn a lot about how we can be working better. You know, I mentioned that the Promise Zones are going to be getting preference points in competitive grants. They're going to be getting preferential access or priority access to technical assistance and other things that help them sort of round out strategies and deepen different elements of their partnerships. We've got federal staff on the ground and at headquarters working directly with them. The AmeriCorps VISTA program has committed 5 AmeriCorps VISTA members to work with each designated Promise Zone, which may be distributed through the organizations that are working in those places. So really terrific human capital resource there. And then if Congress acts, though, there will be tax incentives which are drawn from the old empowerment zone tax incentives for businesses that either hire zone residents or make capital investments in the zone. That's kind of the basic package. And then again, we're just working to make sure that we're exporting whatever we learn to communities all over the country. We're being very intentional about making sure that there is urban, rural, and tribal representation within this pilot group of 20. And that's a very serious commitment on our part, and we are all the time working to kind of build out, you know, what the array of resources and information is that is particular to rural and tribal situations as well as urban. So always in the market for those kinds of suggestions, and I would ask anyone who's on the webinar that's interested in sending us some of those to please do so. And then I can provide all kinds of detail about the selection process. It is all available, including lots of information about eligibility criteria, qualifying criteria for pieces of geography that would be proposed as Promise Zones, how to apply, what programs. We've just posted a whole bunch of new frequently asked questions that came from our first series of webinars. Those webinars are also posted. So there's a ton of information on www.hud.gov/Promise Zones. And I should say that we are taking questions at promisezones@hud.gov. So we take those in by email, and then we answer them in published FAQs, you know, frequently asked questions, and then we send out a notice that we've updated them. So if folks are interested in applying this time, that's a, you know, please do take a look at everything that's on the web, and then if you see something that's still confusing, ask us a direct question. We will get it answered for you, and we will respond as soon as we possibly can. Applications are due November 21st, and they are coming in electronically. So no FedEx worries, but everybody should make sure that they know how to get into the platform. There's a link on the site so that you can sign up and open up an application format. And folks should do that as soon as possible so that they don't have any last-minute hiccups on that kind of thing. So I'm going to hold everything else, I think, to the Q&A, and I think we should definitely hear from Mary in Philadelphia about how this looks on the ground.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. Mary, we're going to go ahead and hand you the ball, right, Cashin? So Mary can handle and move us through her slide presentation. And Mary, you have been unmuted on our side, so we will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I just want to say, sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I I think the federal government's been really intentional right from the beginning about elevating and really naming the role of community action agencies in this work, and I think it's such an important role for us to play, and it's the right role, and we're really excited about having this platform to really talk about this. So Philadelphia in January was designated a promise zone, and so we've been operating for about 10 months as a promise zone. Our promise zone area, I'm just going to click through these slides, is about 2 square miles and has about 35,000 people in it. So we're actually the smallest promise zone of the 5 current existing promise zones, with only 35,000 people. And we're really intentional about that, in that we wanted to make sure it was a population that we really thought we could see an impact on in the next 3 to 5 years, and really be able to measure that impact. And it's also, the promise zone is also the site of a Burn Criminal Justice Grant Award. So we were able to use the planning from that to build off of this work, and really start from something that was already put together about what are the needs of this community, building off the needs assessment we do for our work and other existing plans, and also having already done a lot of work in engaging the community and figuring out what are the residents telling us they really need. But this is an area of really significant need. Our citywide poverty rate is around 26%, which is high enough already, but the average poverty rate in the promise zone is 50%, with some of the census tracts going up to 80%. So it's an area of significant need, but it was also an area where there was already a lot of work in place to bring collaboration and bring new investment so that we can move this work forward. So we were bounded by one of the major streets, Girard, and going out west of 48th Street, with the river sort of as another natural boundary for us. So within that, there is, as I said, a sort of really significant need, but there is also a lot of assets in or around the promise zone. We have our zoo, which is also developing a transportation stop for our subway and for our trolley system. We have both University of Pennsylvania and Drexel, which has been making significant investments in the community and really trying to develop community businesses as well as early learning centers. We have 30th Street Station, which is one of our major transportation hubs, as well as the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So there was a lot of opportunities for employers, for anchor institutions to support this work, and then there was also the transportation people needed to be able to get to jobs within the promise zone, but also other places. So in addition to layering on this Burn Criminal Justice Grant, we were able to take advantage of a lot of different assets and a lot of stakeholders who were really engaged in this work. And our office was the lead implementation partner. So our office is the Community Action Agency for Philadelphia, and over the last 2 years, since 2013, we've been focused on repositioning our office to serve as a convener around issues of poverty. So we developed, in July of 2013, we released our Shared Prosperity Philadelphia Plan, which is our plan to fight poverty, really focused on 5 key goals, which align really nicely with the goals of the Promise Zone. So those are strengthening economic development, economic security and asset building, creating jobs and new workforce opportunities, expanding access to benefits and essential services, such as food stamps, TANF, child care subsidies, things like that, ensuring that children enter school prepared to learn, really focused on expanding access to high-quality early childhood education programs, and then increasing housing security. And our office in particular has been focused on homelessness prevention, so making sure people can stay in their homes. So this gave us a good framework to talk about what we want to accomplish in the Promise Zone, and really was the foundation for the work that we're doing now in that area. But we also build off a lot of other plans. So as I mentioned, this is the site of a Burn Criminal Justice Innovation Program. So they've been having a lot of conversations in the community about what are the needs, what's driving public safety issues in the area, but taking a broken window approach, thinking about how does community engagement impact public safety, how does jobs impact public safety, how does beautification impact public safety, and so thinking about it comprehensively, similar to what's happening in the Promise Zone priorities. And we were also able to take advantage of housing work that's been happening in the area. So there's been a transformation plan around Mantua that was centered around creating new affordable housing opportunities for people in public housing. So taking what was a big tower and making that into more community-infused housing opportunities for low-income residents. So based off of these plans, we created a number of goals. So we have, I'll have to double check my notes, we have 11 goals for the Promise Zone, so ambitious. But they're all centered around sort of the topics we were already talking about. So you can read these goals for yourself, but really focused around education, economic development for our economic development and housing. Looking at, there's a 20% vacancy rate in the main commercial corridor. So how do we address that, and how do we think strategically about attracting new investment and new businesses to the area? Knowing that there is a need for access to jobs and thinking about the major anchor institutions we have in the area, how do we increase job opportunity and get people ready for those jobs? How do we address the lack of good housing opportunities, and recognizing that this area is changing and growing, and with the help of the Promise Zone, some of that change will be accelerated. How do we make sure that people who have been in the Promise Zone for decades are able to stay in their homes, are able to take advantage of revitalization that's happening all around them? And then increasing access to high-quality pre-K is a huge part of this work. So thinking about our education goals, there's a early childhood goal, there's a goal around graduation and the K through 12 pipeline, and then for the needs of adults, how are we getting them access to the skills that they need in order to advance their economic situation. So we've been working with providers in the area to figure out how we go from providing good quality to really great quality early childhood, and how do we expand the number of seats at high-quality providers. Thinking about what we can do in schools and around schools to ensure people are graduating from high school and moving on to college. And then what are we doing to provide subsidized employment or job training programs so that people can get access to education and 21st century skills that they need in order to get family-sustaining wages. And then we also have some significant goals around public safety. So how do we reduce crime using better coordination, smarter access? And this is one of the areas we've had the advantage of this Burn Criminal Justice grant, but really how do we work with these different organizations that are thinking about public safety to do this work more smartly? So because we have Penn and Drexel at the table, we have campus police, we have a transportation center, we have what we call SEPTA police, which is the transportation organization, and then we have City of Philadelphia police. And all of those people have different priorities, and they have constrained resources. So this has really helped create a table for having the conversation about how do we best deploy these resources, what's the role of the community in providing support around public safety issues, and helping to advance a lot of that work. And then how do you prevent crime by improving the quality of public safety? How do we use light and planning and encouraging of people's stewardship of the areas and public spaces that they live and work in in order to increase public safety has been a huge piece of this. And then the last two goals are thinking about how do we engage the community and how do we make residents an active participant. So making sure they're part of the work we do on a day-to-day basis and promote their capacity. And I think you want to make sure that they can be engaged in a way that's meaningful so that there's a significant number of people representing the community at meetings, that they have the tools they need to engage in the conversation and feel recognized and understood, and that we're also meeting them where they're at. So meetings are at times that are appropriate, and we're going to community meetings as well as expecting people to attend our committee meetings. And then the last one, this wasn't a specific focus of the Promise Zone application when it was originally conceived, but what we heard from residents over and over again is that there has to be a health and wellness component to the work that they're doing, which ended up being really great because we were able to work with federal partners, and the federal partners really came to us saying, here are lots of good opportunities for promoting health and wellness in the Promise Zone. So it ended up being very symbiotic, but making sure that they have access to high-quality food, fresh fruits and vegetables in particular is a real challenge. There's no full-service grocery store in the Promise Zone. So how do we work with corner stores to make sure that they can get access to healthy foods there, but also how do we bring a full-service grocery store to the Promise Zone? It has been an ongoing challenge. And then the flip side of that, how do we create more opportunities for a healthy lifestyle, fitness opportunities, and things like that? So those are the 11 goals that guide our work. As I mentioned, we're the lead implementation partner, so we oversee all of the different elements of this work. But we're fortunate to have lots of amazing partners at the table in order to advance this work. So we have 5 committees that we work with in education, public safety, housing, economic opportunity, and health and wellness. So aligned with those goals that we laid out just a minute ago. And for each of those groups, we do a monthly meeting of partners where we talk about, how do we advance this work and what are the roles of the different partners around the table. We also have at least 2, but sometimes 3 implementation partners who oversee the work of the subcommittee. And in each case, we have a city agency, so a government agency, and then a nonprofit partner. So it helps to share the workload, but it also, I think government has its strengths, and so does the nonprofit arena, and so we can leverage those strengths and really play off of each other. So over the last 10 months, we've been able to really advance our strategic planning work, and we're in the process of sort of taking that strategic planning work to the next level. So we have a logic model, but really refining it, and I think, as you heard with our 11 goals, we're also going to be thinking about prioritizing. So what do we want to tackle first? What's first in line? What are the 3 things we want to really get done in the next year or 2 so that we can start focusing on those things and moving those forward? We've also been doing a lot of fundraising. We've been fortunate, as Val mentioned, we've been able to get preference points for federal grants and have been successful in getting a number of those grants as a result. So, for instance, we have gotten resources around teen pregnancy prevention, access to healthy foods, job training opportunities and employment opportunities. So we've been very fortunate with that. We've also had to think through how do we coordinate all of the different fundraising work that's happening across our multiple partners. And so we put together a set of guidelines to talk about how do you get support around the Promise Zone, and then be able to give letters of support that say, this organization is applying on behalf of the Promise Zone in Philadelphia, and they're in coordination with us. We've also been doing a lot of work around civic engagement. So we've been doing community meetings and roundtable discussions to talk about what is the Promise Zone, what do you want to see as a priority among the 5 areas that we're focused in. We've been talking to residents about how do we build equitable development strategies so that neighbors feel like they're part of the success of the Promise Zone and not left behind because of it. And then really pulling residents into the different meetings around the different topic areas that have driven our work. So making sure that they know what's going on and that they're feeding back about what's working and what isn't. So that's a general overview, and I'm sure we can get into more detail with the questions, but gives you a sense of sort of what we've been doing over the last 10 months and where we're looking to go to in the next several years.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
Hi, Mary. This is Jeannie. And I just wondered if you could share with the group how you, you use your community services block grant dollars as the eligible entity in Philadelphia, and maybe how that might be changing as you're pursuing this work, knowing that this is one very small neighborhood and you have to serve the whole city. But I thought that's something folks might be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, and it's a really great question because I think one of the things that's been really great about Promise Zone is it's been helping us focus and prioritize some of the investments we knew we were going to make with CSBG over the last several years and say, let's test this all in the Promise Zone or test many of these strategies in the Promise Zone before we bring them to scale in other places. So we've been able to put what we call a Benephili Center, which is a one-on-one counseling that helps people get screened and enrolled in public benefits, be them federal, state, or local benefits. So we've located that, one of our centers in the Promise Zone. Likewise, we located one of our financial empowerment centers in the Promise Zone. So that provides one-on-one financial counseling and has helped to reduce debt in Philadelphia by $3 million over the last year and a half. But in the Promise Zone, it's helped to reduce debt by about $500,000, which is pretty exciting. And so we can sort of focus and start to layer a lot of these services, and likewise our partners are doing the same. So we've been working with an organization to do job training in the Promise Zone, and really focused on how do we create job training pipelines from for residents in the Promise Zone that directly links to businesses in the Promise Zone. So how do you Penn is always hiring people in lots of different categories. Children's Hospital is always hiring people in lots of different categories. How do we train people who normally might not be able to get into that pipeline to really be ready for those specific jobs and then pull them in? So we've been able to leverage the funds that way. And I think the other thing that we really benefit from as recipients of CSBG is that we can play the role of convener in a way that some organizations might not be as well suited to. And so we've been able to dedicate staff time to bringing these conversations together and keeping those conversations moving and doing the follow-up. We were fortunate to be able to get some CSBG discretionary funds from the state to actually hire a full-time staff person who's solely focused on advancing the work of the Promise Zone. So those are just a few examples of those opportunities.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. That's very helpful.
Yeah, interesting use of the discretionary funds to pay for a real leverage person in the city to liaison with the Promise Zone. That's a great partnership of CSBG and the Promise Zone structure that you have. That's fascinating.
And it's been really helpful, and I think the thinking is also it'll be a good way to use that first year of funding with this discretionary to identify other opportunities to fundraise for that position in the long term. And so we'll be able to really leverage that funds to move the conversation forward to a place where we're more sustainable.
Great. Thank you, Mary. I have a couple of questions that have come in through the chat window, so folks, please continue to type in your questions. We'll collect them. So a couple of questions to pose to Valerie based on some of the conversations that's happened so far. I want to bounce off kind of Mary's comments, though. The role of the CAP agency, the local community action agency, being the lead, being a partner. Can you talk a bit about how that has happened, or what the opportunities might look like for a CAP agency in that kind of situation? Being part of the lead agency certainly is probably more of a unique situation with the city, but I assume that in any application, a community action agency could be the lead.
Yeah, I mean, eligible lead organizations are nonprofits or local government, and sort of we've given a bunch of examples and definitions in the application, but the organization that's best suited to do this work as the lead organization, can be either of those types, and so we're really trying not to dictate that. Now, no matter who the lead organization is, the support of the local government is necessary to be eligible to apply, and that's because so much of the funding and the relationships and the other kinds of local leadership functions are typically served by local government, that it's hard to be long-term sustainable in this work without that kind of partnership. So we have required it. And furthermore, we're actually only allowing one application from any given local government because we're asking folks to focus. So in situations where, and there are a number of larger cities that have asked us about this, hey, we've got a lot of high concentrated poverty areas that meet the, Promise Zone qualifying criterion of 33% poverty or extremely low income, and we don't want to choose. And, we understand that that's awfully hard, but, it's without that level of focus, it's hard to imagine, the level of kind of innovation and really kind of pushing the envelope that we're seeing in Philadelphia and some of the other Promise Zones. And, like Mary said, what we're starting to see in those early Promise Zone situations are folks starting to take the things that they've piloted in the Promise Zone and deliver them elsewhere in the city. So that's already beginning, and it's our expectation that it'll continue.
That's an exciting kind of outcome to hear the pilot and then what works, right? We want to replicate what works. So if you're able to pilot it there, what could have more of that macro impact, certainly. Right. Took your comment to heart earlier about that dynamics of place concept, and again, that how does a large city or municipality find a more narrow neighborhood or area to focus on? Do you find that any of the applicants, is there an advantage to being a municipality that's the lead applicant versus a nonprofit? Any sort of sense to that? I know you say there's a requirement that you have to be working with, so that would kind of lead toward, is there a way to amplify that role? I don't know, can you speak to that a bit?
Well, in addition to requiring that local government be supportive of a particular application, we also are scoring for the degree of commitment. Certainly being the lead applicant is one way to demonstrate a large degree of commitment, but it's not the only way. And I can actually see, you know, I can imagine, although because of our selection process, am barred from, you know, laying out examples at this time, but, you know, I can see a lot of different arrangements that could, you know, make the best use of the skills and expertise and capacity that each of the partners brings to the table and demonstrate a tremendous degree of local government commitment and other partner commitment, because we also score for the commitment level of other types of partners that are important in your place.
Well, even seeing the City of Philadelphia's model where the lead of each of the committees was a partner, municipality, nonprofit partner, I really found that to be an interesting dynamic of the Philadelphia project that would help amplify the value of both sides of that equation.
Well, you know, honestly, one of the things that everybody needs to worry about working with local government is, you know, well, what happens to the strategy when there is a change in leadership? And, you know, Philadelphia is coming right up on one of those situations. You know, we just induced that in San Antonio by stealing their mayor. I think I saw San Antonio on the sign-in list too. So if anybody wants to jump in, but yeah, we're sorry about that. Although we're awfully glad to have him. But you know, those are the sorts of things that any local partnership needs to be able to weather. So we're looking at those sorts of issues too, you know, how do you sustain this effort, whatever happens.
So one of the things that I might note here about Philadelphia and San Antonio, which is also one of the promise zones that was designated, and I happened to have just been in San Antonio last week, and I got to have a wonderful site visit with city officials and professionals there. They're just doing some really great, innovative work all around. But I note that both communities have kind of very strong visioning processes and goal processes for what they want their communities to be like that may have been started by the city but have really taken on community-wide ownership. And I know, Mary, you talked about Shared Prosperity Philadelphia, and San Antonio has something very similar. And, you know, I think that certainly shows a commitment and is some really important foundational work that goes on in communities that, you know, if you're blessed to be in a community where that is happening, there may be something to build on there. And if not, if you're in a community where maybe that work has not gone on, maybe that's a good place to start, and where the Community Action Agency ought to develop a partnership with the city and begin. Even if you're not able to apply for promises this year, sort of teeing things up for the future. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, now if I can add, sorry, I think, you know, the nice thing about being a Community Action Agency is that that needs assessment that we're required to do really is the foundation for that conversation. So, you know, obviously you'll need to hone in a little bit, but you'll have a roadmap for where to start and really what the community is telling you is their real needs.
A few other technical questions have kind of come in here as well that we want to get to. And I think you're going to know the answer. I know the answer. But is there a preference to designate promise zones from only larger cities? I know you talked about urban, rural, and tribal grantees potentially. Is there any preference for any sort of size, shape, poverty rates, things like that folks should be aware of?
Nothing that's not in the application. So what we did do this year, we increased the poverty level a little bit, and I should say that this is the first year, this is the second year of the designations, first year that we have not had a prior grant requirement. So in urban zones it was places that already had an implementation grant under the Choice Neighborhoods Burn Criminal Justice Innovation or Promise Neighborhoods program. The reason we did that was because we needed folks that already had a kind of a head start in working through those grants, which were pretty multidisciplinary, to tell us what we were still missing. And Mary and her colleagues are doing that every single day. We are missing a lot, ladies and gentlemen, but we are getting better. So so this round will be open to everybody, and the qualifying criteria again are 33% poverty or ELI, up to 200,000 in population. In urban areas, it needs to be at least 10,000. And there's slight variations for rural and tribal areas that are outlined in those application guides, which are posted on the website. But within the urban category, we actually had gotten this kind of question a lot, and we set up a subcategory for small and medium-sized MSAs. We do intend to make at least one designation this year, presuming capacity and demand. If there's enough demand to have a competition and, a good enough application within that subcategory of central CBSA, which I'm not remembering the exact translation of, but it's a metro area of less than 500,000. Okay. We wanted to make sure that we had at least one of those sorts of situations as well. Okay.
So I hope what my colleagues out in the field are getting is that this is not just an urban initiative, that the administration has really worked hard. Yes, we're talking about Philadelphia, I mentioned San Antonio, but Kentucky Highlands Community Development Corporation is the rural grant promise zones that was designated, and then we have a tribe in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. So please don't think if you're out there and you're not in a big urban area that this is something that is not open to you, because that's not the case.
Yeah, this is a pilot program for us, and so we need to be able to work with as many different kinds of communities as we can, consistent with high quality strategies and execution. Mm-hmm. So we are consciously trying to do that.
Well, and hearing some of the other things you were talking about earlier in terms of targeting programs and services, the need to be comprehensive, and the focus on the need on outcomes. Mm-hmm. And data collection. And we kind of were thinking early before we got started about what's community action's role if you're not the lead. What are some of the ways that CAP agencies, what can you bring to the table to be a true partner around the table? And I think there are a lot of different places, but certainly that focus on outcomes that we've been doing for decades, and really to shift from outputs to really what's happening and changing on the community level as well as with families, I think is something unique that community action can really bring to the table. Could you talk a bit about how you would see a CAP be a partner, if not the lead? What would be some of the elements that they could really fit in on an application?
Well, these are the kinds of things I'm not allowed to say.
Okay, fair enough.
You
might have thoughts.
Yeah, you all can have plenty of thoughts, with your superior experience with the sector, actually. Yeah. Your thoughts are probably better than mine, but not to mention allowed.
Fair enough.
However, I think the kind of experience you just described leads to multiple different ways of partnering. Yeah. And it really is about who does what in a particular community and who needs to be at the table to move it to the next level. Mm-hmm. And getting that right, and maybe bringing some more partners in, is the the kind of thing that we're looking at as a situation in which, all other things being equal, a federal dollar invested is going to have more impact than it would someplace else, mm-hmm. honestly, which is why you get preference points.
And I would just say, go ahead, Mary.
No, I mean, obviously we were the lead implementation partner, but, we have lots of partners at the table who aren't lead implementation partners, and, knowing what we know about CAP, certainly there's lots of different areas where they need support and they need resources in that particular designated area. So figuring out what are the resources that you could either realign or move to be in that high need area, and whether there's a role you can play as a, and not all of these are organized the same way, but a subcommittee chair or co-chair of a different topics that are priorities of your organization. As you saw with us, we didn't ask anyone to sort of reinvent the wheel. we built off of existing plans. So what in your plan aligns with the Promise Zone priorities that you could elevate and concentrate in a particular area is really, I think, the question for the community action agencies who are looking to find a role in this work. And then really who's already having these conversations, because I think there's so much work to be done around this that people are really hungry for organizations who are, raising their hand and saying, I want to be a part of this. So figuring out how do you raise your hand in an effective way, I think, is really helpful.
So this is Jeannie, and I think that's very helpful, Mary. And if I were an executive director on this call, and I wasn't sure if any community in my area was, trying to put an application together, I would start, contacting mayors and city officials and, asking if they are familiar, if they know if anybody is putting an application together. And if somebody is, then I would want to go have a meeting and look at what are the goals that they're laying out in their Promise Zones application. So, Mary, Philadelphia had 11 very clear goals, and many of those goals are things that, different community action agencies could really be helpful with. So if I looked at a list of goals like, say, Philadelphia has, and I was a CAP director, I would know immediately where I might be able to be helpful. And that's what I'd have a conversation with folks about. Where are they trying to go? What are their goals? And what could our agency help them do? So I know my colleagues around the country, and I know many of you already know probably who is thinking about applying, and I know some of you are already leads, and you are on this call because you thought you might be able to get a little tidbit of information that might help you with your application, and I certainly hope that you did. But if you don't know, maybe this happens to be new information, I really hope that you'll go and talk to other important stakeholders in your community and find out what might be happening. And if you do that and you find something out, let us know. Let Denise know. Let me know. And we can do, Denise especially can really have a robust conversation with you. I need to be a little careful, like Valerie, and make sure that we're not out of the bounds of what's legal as federal officials. But we'll do what we can to support you in your efforts.
Thank you, Jeannie. Keep an eye on the clock. Valerie, is there anything else that you'd like to leave the agencies with about the Promise Zones application process, the initiative itself? Any final things you'd like that you meant for us to find a way to put in the conversation?
No, I think actually Mary gave us a terrific example of how this is all operating and how it really kind of grows with the community and the planning that's going on there. One of the questions we often get is, you have sort of 5 goals stated for the Promise Zone initiative. Do I have to stick to those? And, I think those are really big, broad buckets. They're create jobs, leverage private resources, reduce violent crime, improve educational opportunities, and one more. No, housing started in. Sorry. Anyway, so there are 5. But they're big, broad buckets of things. And one of the things that came out of the early going is that every single Promise Zone has health and wellness in some way, shape, or form added to its strategy, and there is much, much nuance in each of those strategies that weeds in and out of, the broader goals that the community has defined. So we may be sort of targeting ourselves one way at the federal level, but we are asking folks to, tell us what really matters in your community. And in the current application, we've allowed a space for folks to add, another goal, and certainly define their own sub-goals, and just really work with you. We're asking about what your sequence is, what your priorities are based on what you see as the first things that need to be done. So really trying to wrap the federal system more closely to what the communities and the leadership are trying to do at the local level. The last thing I'll mention is that in the application this time we have it's all coming in electronically, as I mentioned, and we have a space for folks to fill in sort of in this electronic survey formats like SurveyMonkey on steroids, right? So, and governmentized.
That's kind of scary.
It's kind of scary, yeah. It's actually pretty easy. It really is. But it sort of organizes the application in a way that makes it easier for us to review. It also allows us to see the kinds of activities, services, and projects that folks are undertaking in connection with their goals in these high concentrated poverty areas. And that's going to be, for us, a searchable base of information that will be immensely helpful in shaping what we do next. We have asked communities to check a box and say, we will allow you to make this information public. Really hoping people consider doing that, because we have had interest from foundations, social investors, other kinds of outside partners, and just what's going on out there, and where are there funding gaps, and who's doing what, who's leading that piece of the project. And that's all information we need to do our application review, but there are a lot of folks who are in the market for it, and to the extent that folks allow us to use the information that we take in, we will be trying to engage those folks to sort of find out more about what you're doing. As agencies, we'll be using it to think about technical assistance and, other things we might be doing in this space to just, help improve the quality of our support for your work. And so we really do want that kind of granular level of detail to be able to just be smarter the next time around. So everyone should, really take a hard look at that stuff and give us as much information as you feel comfortable using, because I think that could be hopefully quite helpful for folks.
Great.
As we go into next year.
Mary, anything that's come to your mind before we wrap up that you wanted to make sure folks heard from your office?
I think one thing I don't want to leave without saying, we did post some information around our logic model for the Promise Zone, which I know has been a really helpful organizing tool for us, as well as the org chart that you saw in the PowerPoint. So you can go to www.sharedprosperityphila, PHILA.org, and you can find that on our front page if people are interested in finding that. So, but otherwise, I'm just shocked for the opportunity, so thank you for creating this conversation.
Thank you. Well, and shockingly, Mary, one of the things that is in the structure of how we're asking for information this year is that sort of logic model format. It's not super wonky. Hopefully it's relatively user-friendly. But we figured we could take out some of the, just the difficulty of how you structure the communications and all of that kind of stuff from the grant writing process by getting the information in an order that makes sense for us. And that all happens on the back side of that survey document so that it arranges it for us in a way that makes sense. So, if you answer the questions in the way that they're asked, it'll spit itself out in a way that we can use it well and that starts to communicate in the same way that the high-scoring applicants did last year. So I should just, hopefully that makes things a little easier for folks out there.
Good. Jeannie, any last thoughts you'd like to share with the network?
No, just thank you, Denise and Mary and Valerie, for taking time this afternoon, and thanks to my colleagues out there for logging into this call and trying to educate yourselves and pursue what I think is a very important opportunity to help make communities better, which is who we are and what we're about. So thank you.
Well, and thank you again all for being with us today. Our learning cluster on place-based will be taking a lot of the information that came in today. If there is another opportunity that folks would like to dialogue specifically about this application process between now and the deadline of applicants, email me at dharlow@communityactionpartnership.com, and we can look at setting up a separate web call, conference call, something to help facilitate some of that dialogue. I also encourage you to reach out to your state association for community action. Many of them are probably well attuned to what's going on with the Promise Zones. They could also provide that liaison facilitative role. But please don't hesitate to contact us. And again, our learning cluster on place-based again, funded by the Office of Community Services through CSBG, we'll be looking at this information. I know we didn't get to all of your questions. We'll see what we can do to research some of the answers to some of those questions. We'll be sharing the web addresses that were shared, the email address at HUD to ask questions as well, and we'll get that out to all the attendees on today's webinar. You will get a brief survey after today's webinar asking you if this format worked well for you. I hope that it did. Given the cost of travel, we wouldn't have been able to have you all come in for this conversation, so we try to use technology for good wherever we can. So thank you again for all your great work. We look forward to seeing how Community Action plays a role in the next round of Promise Zone grantees, or designees, whatever the case may be, I guess is the right way. Designees, no, there's no grant fund, sorry. No, but the designee concept has a lot of value to it. Yeah. And the most important part is the return on investment to the communities we all live in and serve, and what value we can bring to these parts of our country that can really have this focused expertise on moving families out of poverty. So thank you for what you're doing every day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.